So let's get going. The issue here is one that I think all of us are aware of. So in this webinar, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about the issue itself, but more sharing with you some of my experience and case histories and examples that you might find helpful, as you go forward. So the idea of sustaining is applicable to enterprise-wide sustaining, like our company, embarked on a lean initiative, and then after a few years, it kind of petered out, that kind of sustaining. Or we could have sustaining for individual projects. So we have a Kaizen event, for example. And almost every Kaizen event I've worked on has been successful when, at the time. But then if you come back sometime later, it's not uncommon to see that things have kind of gone back to the old way or backslid. So there's that second kind of sustaining that we'll be talking about. So we'll be addressing really both of these things in this webinar. So am I qualified to talk about this? Well, I think so. The ones in the bullets here in yellow that I highlighted are actual lean implementation jobs that I've had. And I started this journey way back in 1989. So I'm dating myself, obviously, but before lean was lean. So I've been involved in hundreds of projects, both plant-wide or company-wide transformation projects, as well as lots of Kaizen events and more focused lean projects. So I think I have enough experience under my belt right now to be able to share some of these things with you. Now, first question is this really a problem? Is lack of sustaining actually a problem? Well, I think we all know it is from our experience, all of you. But let's look at some data from a couple different sources. I just did a Google search and tried to find some good sources that seem to be reliable. In fact, one of them, I can't claim that this source is necessarily reliable, but I use it anyways, ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT for some data as well. So the estimates, like one of them that seems to be reputable is the Project Management Institute. So the Project Management Institute presumably has some data from their members on sustainability, and they're projecting a range of between 65 and 75% failure, right? Failure rate, not success rate, failure rate. And you can see that in the quote there. He said approximately 75% of projects fail to meet at least one of the stated baseline objectives. Only 1 in 4 projects can be considered 100% successful. So that's pretty terrible, isn't it? That's pretty awful. And the failure of a lean project is doubly disgraceful from the point of view that not only did you fail to achieve the goals of the project, but all the time and effort invested in doing the project are also wasted. So it's waste on top of waste. So if we look at the Toyota 7 wastes, this failure to sustain is not one of the wastes. I guess it was assumed under the 7 wastes that wouldn't happen. But if we include failure to sustain projects, is a huge one, huge waste. So Ashok, you asked a question over what time horizon based on which failure rate is calculated. Well, things always change. We want them to continue to improve. That's continuous improvement. So any project is expected to change, but you'd expect it to change in the direction of positivity. So in my experience, as I said a minute ago, almost every project we work on is a success at that moment. But what kind of time frame, can we expect it to sustain? Well, we like to either have it get better or sustain the way it is forever. So if we go back to that area in 6 months or a year, certainly we'd expect it to still be there. 10 years later, we'd expect it to be further improved. I mean, that would be the best possible outcome. So to summarize this slide, yes, it is an issue, and it's probably a pretty big one. So it's worth talking about here. So in this webinar, what I'm going to do is this. I've picked out from a pretty long list of potential causes for lacking to sustain. I picked out a couple of the big ones that I think were more important. And so I want to do a summary of each one of those, issue by issue. I want to summarize it. I want to give you some examples or clarification of what it is we're talking about. And then I want to draw on some of my experiences, my case histories or examples. And some of those examples are going to be positive examples. In other words, here are things we could maybe emulate to reduce this particular risk of lacking to sustain or backsliding. And some of them are going to be cautionary tales where we attempted to sustain with techniques, but it was actually counterproductive, right? Those particular countermeasures. So then finally for each one, maybe some additional countermeasures and cautions. All right, so let's start with the first one. You're going to notice here I'm kind of heavy on management, right? Management issues. In my mind, at the end of the day, management, upper management, middle management is responsible for sustaining, right? It's not the workers. You can't blame the workers exactly. You have to look at management or leadership. So that's why I'm going to be spending there are a couple issues related to that. So the first one is leadership doesn't really understand lean. So you're trying to implement lean either as a department or a Kaizen event or company-wide. But if you dig deep or you look under the covers, the actual leadership team doesn't really understand it. Now, they might be really good at lip service, giving speeches. But when you push them a little harder, you realize maybe they don't understand it. And the logical conclusion here is if you don't understand it, how can you support it, right? How can you lead if you don't understand it at a fairly deep level? So the people we're directing our spotlight on right now are from the C-suite down to supervisors. And there's a tendency I've seen in many companies for those people, or especially upper management, to want to delegate lean implementation. So they'll fund or they'll start a lean department, right? And hire some consultants or your lean manager. But at the top level, their understanding is somewhat superficial, even though they could be good at talking about it. Now, I say a reference here, W. Edwards Deming. Deming was very hot on this. I know many of you have read Deming, right? Deming's works, the father of the Japanese economic miracle. And if you're not familiar with Deming, well, you need to get on it and educate yourself about Deming. So one of Deming's things was this issue. He had a term, he called it deep knowledge, I think it is. And I think he was referring to something similar to what we're talking about, meaning not just superficial understanding, but a real deep understanding of whatever the issue is. In this case, we're talking about lean. The other person that mentioned this is, as examples, is Albert Einstein, who said, you don't really understand something unless you can explain it to your grandmother. Because if you can't explain it to your grandmother, but you can talk about it a lot, that's probably an indication that you don't understand it deeply enough. You have a superficial understanding. So one thing you'll notice in companies like Toyota, TMH is Toyota Material Handling, where we spend quite a bit of time, is they don't have an actual lean department. And I don't think there are any positions like lean manager. It's basically because they've been at this a while and been pretty good at sustaining. Every manager is a lean manager from that point of view. So it's everyone's responsibility. And the idea that there's going to be a specialist that specializes in lean is not quite so common. Now they do have people that are assigned, to help Kaizen events, so they do have something in that role, but basically they don't, right? They don't have a lean department. It's basically company-wide. So let me share a couple case histories or experiences that I had on this. First one is Air Products. I'm mentioning the names here because these happened a while ago and these are positive. Both of these are positive examples. Sometimes I don't mention the company, but I think I'm okay here. So Air Products, they make, they deliver gases, oxygen, and various nitrogen, all kinds of gases. But they also make products, like they have gas cabinets that regulate the gases that they sell to their customers. And so we were working on one of that. This is one of my first projects, first lean projects ever as a lean consultant. So it was successful. We did a line design. We redesigned their gas cabinet assembly line, right, or their entire value stream for that product. And big improvements. It was great, big success. And then, we left, and I was able to go back a few years later and not knowing what to expect. And what I found when I got back was that things were not only as we left it, but better. They continued to improve. And I was happy about that, relieved. And I asked the plant manager, who's basically in charge of this effort, what his secret to success was, because I knew that, it didn't always happen that way. If you come back to a project years later and it's better than it was, that's a great thing. And he said, well, I think the answer here is pretty simple. The answer is that I'm still here, he said. In other words, he was the plant manager and he wasn't going to let it backslide. Now, that's a good answer, but it also raises a concern. Okay, what happens when you leave? In other words, have we really built a sustainable culture or not? But at least for the time being, that's a message that if the top management is on it, right, and they know what to look for and they are empowered and passionate about the issue, then probably things are not going to backslide, or at least not as quickly. So that was one. The other one, though, is more interesting, I think. This was Rockwell Collins. I think their headquarters is in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken. They make avionics. They used to be Collins, and then Rockwell bought them, so they're Rockwell Collins. And this was a conference, and the CEO, president or CEO, I can't remember his title, somewhere at the top of Rockwell Collins, was asked to give the keynote address. And it was a lean conference, so he was talking about lean. And he said, in a nutshell, he said, several years ago, we decided to go all in on lean at Rockwell Collins. So we were going to train people. We were going to embrace this way of doing business and the way of thinking. And we funded lots of training, and we funded over a few years, over 600 Kaizen events, which, this is a big company. I think it's 40,000 people. So 600 seems like a lot, but I guess it's possible. But he said, but the problem was this: when I looked at my results, my P&L results, and I tried to see, okay, where did all this money and effort go? I mean, I knew where it went, but how did this help? I really couldn't see the impact. My P&L didn't look like that different from what it would have been with no lean and no Kaizen events. So that got me to thinking. And one of the things, this is the CEO talking, and he said, one of the things I realized was that my staff, my top VPs, my C-suite people were seemingly pretty good at talking the talk, but I wasn't sure they could walk the walk. So what I asked them to do was, for each of my top people, I asked them to be able to teach, not be able to, but to teach lean subjects. And when we asked them to do that, we realized pretty quickly that they did not have this deep understanding we were talking about. And they needed to do that, because clearly when you have to teach something to someone, and this is what Einstein was saying, when you have to teach something, you better understand it, because you're going to be asked questions and you have to explain it clearly to your grandmother. So that's what he did. And he said, and this is the point of his talk, the keynote address, was that as soon as we did that, we asked managers, we required managers to start teaching these lean subjects, even as something as simple as 5S. Then we started seeing different results. I started seeing those results on the P&L. So I think that's a powerful lesson. If your managers can't teach lean, they don't understand it. And if they don't understand it, how do you expect them to lead it and sustain lean results? So there we go. So that would be a countermeasure, right? Now, this is a tough one because if we're at a lower level in the organization, we can't require that our manager teach lean subjects. So this is something that would have to be led from the top, like it was at Rockwell Collins, but still a pretty powerful thing. And I think, by the way, side comment, if you go to Toyota, at least my experience at Toyota Material Handling is, and we didn't test this, but I'm confident that I could have asked any manager at Toyota to explain or teach any of the topics related to the Toyota production system, and they could do so clearly and accurately. That was my feeling, because whenever I did have questions with almost anyone that I would interface with, that's what I got. I got a very clear, confident explanation of that particular element of the Toyota production system. So let's move on to the second one. So this is also related to management, and it has to do with misdirected lean vision. And by that, I mean that the vision at the top of the organization's C-suite, even if the company has embraced lean, may in reality be focused on other stuff, not lean, right? For example, they may be very focused on profits, profitability, short-term profitability, or quarterly results, right? Quarterly profitability, or your share price of shares, or shareholder value, quote unquote, or just company politics, right? I mean, I've seen that as well, where the big preoccupation of people at the top is who's first, who's second, and political issues. Or even if they're embracing lean, at least verbally, what they think is at that level that lean is all about eliminating waste and improving productivity and efficiency. And if that's what they think, then and you can confirm that just by going to Google, right, and asking Google, what is lean all about? And Google will probably tell you that lean is all about eliminating waste and improving productivity and efficiency. However, when you take that point of view, then your focus is going to lean towards, no pun intended, headcount management, like productivity to reduce costs, because that's the most controllable thing you may think you have in a company, is how can I be more efficient and reduce the number of people I have and get the same output with fewer number of people. That's going to be a big focus. And then the whole idea of waste elimination. So you're going to encourage people to become waste hounds and look for waste, right? Try to eliminate waste everywhere you can find it. And that's really the essence of a lean initiative. And that's not unknown, right, in companies. Now, here's the thing, and this may be new to some of you, this observation, but I do see it in action. When Taiichi Ono, who was one of the leaders, founders, fathers of the Toyota production system, retired from Toyota after like many years, he did a number of interviews, and one of the interviews he did was with some theory of constraints folks, Goldratt, and so they had a very pretty in-depth discussion about these issues. And what Taiichi Ono said was that when we started implementing the Toyota production system, one of the things that I was concerned about was sharing information, because we were getting success with what we were doing, but I didn't want to share this with the Americans or the Europeans necessarily, because they were just going to compete with us. They would take what we're doing and just copy it. And so I didn't want to do that. On the other hand, I didn't want to say nothing, right? We couldn't really keep it all a big secret. I mean, we're a big company. Things are not that secret. So what I did was I created, he didn't use this term, but I created a red herring to kind of distract people, to get them moving in a direction that was not entirely wrong, but was not going to enable them to really duplicate or emulate the kind of success that we were having at Toyota. And what that was I tried to convince, and I gave talks and seminars, I tried to convince the Western companies, Western management, that lean was all about eliminating waste. And they bought it, right? And they went off, and a lot of these companies, focus their efforts on the 7 wastes and training people to find waste and, eliminate waste. Now, that was not entirely wrong, right? I mean, waste is waste. And if you can reduce waste, that's a good thing. But what Taiichi Ohno said was, I knew that was going to help us at Toyota not have such strong competitors because waste is everywhere. And I knew that if they just focused on trying to reduce waste everywhere, they were going to be reducing waste in processes that were not on the critical path, right? They're going to dilute their process improvement efforts, in other words. So if eliminating waste is not a primary objective of Taiichi Ohno's, what was? And what he said was, my primary objective is to build for Toyota a river system. In other words, just-in-time system, actually, where we focus on connecting our processes together, linking, physically connecting those processes together all the way up to our outside suppliers, and then reducing the timeline, right? Reducing the time to go through that, what we call a value stream. So in other words, it was a value stream focus, not purely eliminating waste. Now, how do you reduce that timeline? Well, eliminating waste is one way you do it, but not as a primary goal, as a secondary goal. And the same thing he said, believe it or not, he said the same thing about quality. He said, well, if we don't have good quality, people won't buy our products. That's one thing. But also, if we don't have good quality, we're not going to be able to flow. Our river system is not going to be flowing smoothly. So that's another reason, but it seems like quality was also, in a sense, a secondary objective as well. So again, we're not saying good quality and waste reduction are bad things. We're just saying that the primary focus was building this river system. And the last comment I'll make about that was they asked him, well, why do you think that worked? why do you think that this river system idea actually worked? And Taiichi Ohno said, well, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly why it worked, but that was our focus. And he said it wasn't easy to convince people. In fact, my ideas were not accepted by Toyota at first. At first, they sent me over to one of our sister companies to implement it over there first. And when they proved it over there, then we brought it back to Toyota. So he said, I'm not entirely sure, but proof is in the pudding. So I guess what I'm saying here is that if we want to get those, similar kind of results where Toyota went from bankrupt to the #1 car company in the world, then maybe this idea of thinking in terms of a river system is a good approach. And to sustain all that from the top, so back to the sustaining idea, to sustain that vision from the top all the way down, we have some tools like Hoshin Kanri, which take a top-level vision and then in a disciplined, structured kind of way, deploy that through actual projects, actual things you're doing, and from the top level all the way down, ideally to people, on the assembly line. Okay, so misdirected lean vision. Third one is standard work. So maybe this is the last one where I beat up on management. So standard work for managers. Now we know all about standard work for workers, right? Work steps, the work steps on the assembly line. So we document them and we list them. But what about standard work for managers? Well, that's a little more rare, say less common. There's a great book on this that I recommend. Again, if you have not read this, then highly recommend it, by David Mann, called Creating a Lean Culture. And it may be hard for you to read on the screen, but the subtitle of the book is Tools to Sustain Lean Conversion. So there we go. Thank you, David Mann, using the word sustain. And it's, I guess, it's currently in the third edition, and it won the Shingo Prize. In my experience, Shingo Prize winning books tend to be good. And this is one of our favorites, one of my top 5 maybe books on lean. So what were, examples of standard work for managers include tools like Komishibai boards, committee by board where you have a visual tool that managers or supervisors can use to make sure that the tasks that, say, the team leaders or the operators are supposed to be doing are being done. So it's a very hierarchical of accountability, where we start at the bottom and we go up, so that people are held accountable for doing things and not just assigned to do them. In other words, someone's checking on you. The other one, another example of standard work for managers is Kanban card tracking. So workers are required, this is at Toyota, that I've seen, they still use paper cards, at least at some Toyota plants, the one I'm familiar with. And you might think that's a little outdated, but they wanted to keep some kind of physical connection between the operator and putting a card in a box and, requesting replenishment of parts. They wanted to maintain that and not have everything just kind of hidden, electronically. So they have paper cards, but the accountability or the sustainability of that system is if a card gets lost, which can happen, right? We need to have a system in place so we can catch it. So we have a way of sustaining our Kanban system. Because if a card gets lost, there's no signal, right, to replenish. Therefore, you won't replenish that quantity, and you could potentially stop the line, right, run out of parts. So they have won't go into it in detail here, but they have an automated system to track these cards. Each card has a barcode, and there's a stage in the system where the barcode gets scanned. It gets scanned when it gets returned, right, for refilling. So if that barcode is released and it doesn't get scanned within a certain amount of time, that raises a flag. And then it's management's job to go out and find out what happened. Now this is, you can imagine that if things were really broken, that would be a nightmare. But things happen, continually, and because we're humans. And so part of management's job as accountability, part of the standard work for managers, is to sustain the Kanban system, again, with some automated help. So it's pretty powerful. Another powerful tool for standard work for managers is the Obeya room. I sometimes use the term war room. I don't like the term war room, but Obeya room, Obeya I think means just the big room. So they set up a room, again, at Toyota where each department has a section of the wall, and on that wall they have their KPIs and they have the projects, the improvement projects they're working on. And there's a daily, not weekly, not monthly, there's a daily review of those various departments with typically the plant manager or the president is there. So what that does is it really powerfully enforces this idea of standard work for managers, because you're very close to the action. The manager is, the department manager is very close to the action, and you're going to be held accountable by your boss, or your boss's boss is going to be there in the room, and not every once in a while, but every day. So you don't want to look, if nothing else, you don't want to look bad in front of your boss's boss. So it really is a powerful way of keeping things going, right? Making sure that things don't fall through the cracks. Okay, so in essence, the standard work for managers means we have a hierarchy of accountability, so that starting at the lowest level in an organization, you're assigned things to do, right? That's your job description. But if you don't do your job description, someone's looking, right? Someone's holding you accountable. Because if people are not held accountable in a nice way, ideally, then there's always going to be a tendency to not do it, right? And I'm as guilty of that as anyone, or maybe more guilty in the jobs that I've had in the past. If I'm assigned things, but I don't think it's that valuable, and no one's checking up on me, at some point in time, I would tend to just stop doing it. And if no one complained, I guess it wasn't needed, right? It's kind of my feeling. So very powerful book, Creating a Lean Culture. Highly recommend it. Probably the number one thing for sustaining changes is this, right? This one is the best one. Okay, next thing. I'm watching the clock. We're doing pretty well. Next thing is this idea of process maturity. And this is a pretty powerful idea as well. And the idea here is this. If we're trying to improve a process, we have to understand that the process could be at various levels of maturity. And here they are. Here's the maturity model. So if we start at the bottom of the pyramid, maturity level 1, it says the process has been identified, defined, and has an owner. So this level of maturity is pretty low, but it means we have a name for it. We have a name for the process. We could be doing stuff and not even have a name for it, right? We're just doing things. So we have a name for it, for a group of work steps, and we have some description of it, and we have someone who's the owner of it, the responsible person for that process. And that process could be a department. Usually it's a work of the similar type of work, right? So that's a pretty low level. That's not going to get us very far. So when we get to the second level, what we're saying here is that we've documented the work, written it down. So this is standard work definition or standard work documentation to the work instruction level. So someone who's not trained in this process could look at the instruction and presumably do it correctly, right, and consistently. So that's pretty important. And we want to include in the work instruction level the work steps, the work times, the value-added, non-value-added flag, a description of why this step is critical, all those levels of detail that we do as lean practitioners, right? We should be familiar with this already. It's a pretty basic thing. Now, level 2 is not good enough because number 3 is the process has certified trainers and is standardized. So just documenting the process doesn't mean that people are doing it or know how to do it, been trained to do it that way, or that we're following up. So that is level 3. Now, here's the important point. Until we get to the level where we have standard work in a process, people are trained to do it that way, and we have certified trainers to teach them correctly, and we have some level of accountability for that. Until we get to that level, then that process can't be considered stable. And if that process is not stable, then trying to make changes to it are not going to be sustainable. So in other words, any kind of Kaizen event in a process where we're not at level 3, at least, is kind of a waste of time. We can kind of know, we know ahead of time that sustainability in that process is probably not going to be very likely. So what should we do? Well, we should get to level 3 right, in that process before we try to do anything else. Now, once we're at level 3, then we can move on. So level 4 is the process is under process control, is analyzed and improved using data. So we have some KPIs, we have ways of measuring that process, and we are in a Kaizen kind of mode with that process to improve it. And then level 5, of course, is a continuation of that, but showing a trend of improvement in that process for some period of time. Maybe it's 12 months or 18 months where we're not backsliding. So we've shown not only that we can improve it, but we can sustain it and continue to improve it. And the performance of that process is benchmarking pretty much, with the best in the world at that. So not so easy to get to level 5. But the main point, the summary here is you need to get to level 3. So here we go. The difficulty or the futility of trying to improve low maturity processes, trying to Kaizen a process that's at a low level of maturity will not sustain. The risk is high. I don't want to say never. I'm just saying risk is high that it's not going to sustain. And there are a lot of examples of doing this. For example, if you've implemented a quick and easy Kaizen program, what we mean by that is soliciting ideas from operators, which sounds great, right? A suggestion system. And you encourage people with quick and easy Kaizen. This is Norman Bodek, by the way, wrote a book on this called The Idea Generator. So you're asking people for improvement ideas, and ideally those ideas should be small. Because if they're big, we can't actually do it very easily, implement it. Whereas if they're small improvement ideas, then people can do them easily. All that's great. We're big fans of that. But if they're implementing those ideas in a process that's not at level 3, then those ideas, even if they're small suggestions, are not going to stick. As soon as that operator goes away, chances are good that change is not going to stick because that process hasn't been standardized. So spot improvement or silo type improvements in less than level 3 are not a good idea. I'll give you a case history of that. We conducted, this is a cautionary tale. We did a hospital value stream mapping event, my partner Gerard and I, at one of our local hospitals. We're here in Colorado, and it was a pretty big hospital. I think they had 400 beds, so decent size. And we got two teams together, two groups of nurses and a lot of other folks, administrators. And we did a value stream mapping event for two departments, the emergency department and the OR department. And we did a classic value stream mapping exercise, where we defined the process steps. Then we did brainstorming with the team to identify potential Kaizen events. And between my team and Gerard's team, we came up, and this was 2 days, a 2-day focused event. In 2 days, we came up with 120 improvement ideas. And we thought, wow, that's fantastic. That's a great success. And some of them were small, some of them were bigger. But what a great success. Now we have a big database of things to work on. And that was true. But we hadn't been looking really at the level of maturity of the processes that were, going to be impacted. And as a result, then, when we would come back later on, we would find that the implementation of those 120 ideas was either non-existent, or in cases where they had actually tried to do things, sustainability was really poor. So I think it ties back to what we're talking about here, right? That we were putting the cart before the horse of trying to make improvement changes without looking at the process maturity model first. So I'm suggesting here, when you do a value stream mapping, here's an idea. Add a metric. You know how there's a data box in value stream mapping underneath the process box? Add a measurement under there, in addition to the time and the number of operators or whatever else you're tracking there under the data in the data box. Add a process maturity measurement, an assessment of how mature is this process from the point of view of the process maturity model. And that's going to give you an idea of the value stream maturity. Because if you have a value stream and a lot of those processes are not at level 3, then you know where you need to work, where you need to focus your time and attention. And it's probably not going to be some of these Kaizen post-it notes that you put on the value stream. Could be somewhere else. Okay? In other words, getting to level 3 or higher. So there we go. Hope you found that useful. Next one, in terms of helping sustain changes, employee training. So we've been beating up management. Now let's talk about everyone. And what you'll find then in an environment where employee knowledge of lean is low or non-existent, but you want them to do lean things, right, or implement changes, it's going to be harder, right? Because they don't know why. You're just asking them to change the way they've been doing things, maybe for years, and they don't really understand why. Okay, so really what needs to happen here is not so much talk, but it's more demonstration or learning in small pieces, but critically important to do that. And the example I want to give here of something that worked really well to motivate people to learn, because again, some people, there's a normal kind of bell curve of people's excitement about learning. And I think it's on one side, you have the early adopters, or the people that love learning new things. And probably all of you here have got to be in that category because you're attending this webinar. Right? Why would you be here if you weren't that kind of person? But we're a minority, I hate to tell you. Now, most people are in the middle. They're willing to learn if they have to, but they're not the kind of person that normally in their spare time, likes to continue that learning experience. They have other things on their mind. But they're willing to go along with it with a certain amount of incentive. And then you have people on the far end that don't really like learning, that never read, right? And maybe you're going to learn something new with a gun put to their head, but they'll learn if it's part of a thing that they do rather than a specific seminar or learning event. So at JCIT was the John Costanza Institute of Technology. This is how I got my start in Lean, prior to when Lean was Lean, way back in 1989. This was a company based here in Colorado. And what John Costanza, the founder, the head guru, did was he took, and excuse me, John, if I'm misrepresenting this, but he took the information that was out there at the time, which was the 80s, and he understood it well, and he packaged it as a system, and he rebranded it. He called it demand flow technology. Some of you may have heard of demand flow technology, but it's kind of faded, right, from our lexicon now. But that's what we were learning. And it was only years later when I realized, hey, demand flow technology, or DFT, is really kind of an Americanized version of the Toyota production system. That's what it is, because the overlap was dramatic. But that's what we were learning. Now, as a new consultant, so I was trained by them. I got really excited about it, changed my life, I guess you could say, changed my career path. And a few years later, I applied for a job with them. I said, I want to do this full-time rather than being a lean person within a company. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, Ball Aerospace at the time. So you can imagine that as a new consultant, and the company was growing, so I wasn't alone. There were a bunch of newbies with us. There was an incentive to get people to learn a lot quickly, right? To get up to speed so you could build them out, right? Charge them and get them independent so they could go out and support these customers without screwing it up. So what they did at JCIT, which was brilliant, I thought, was our compensation system had a certain component tied to what they call certification. So certification was learning a new topic. That could be a consulting skill, or it could be a teaching skill that we were offering, as part of our suite of services. And for every certification related to these skills, you would earn a certain number of points, and those points would add up. And when you hit a certain threshold of points, you'd get a pay raise. Now, it wouldn't be all of your pay, but it would be motivating, let's say, motivating. And so as a new consultant, we saw this in front of us and realized, hey, we can give ourselves pay raises as fast as we can learn and master these skills. It wasn't enough to just learn it. You had to do it, right? You had to demonstrate your ability under the guidance of another certified consultant. But it was a big incentive. And as a result, then, it was extremely successful in getting folks up to a high level of skills about as fast as you can imagine, I think. So that was great. So I'm suggesting that, tying back to our issue here, that if you have employees and you want to encourage them, there might be some certification program that's tied to compensation that is maybe more meaningful than simply learning for the pure pleasure of it or because your boss tells you to, right? In other words, some kind of built-in incentive. It doesn't have to be huge, but it could be something that motivates people to learn. Case history, John Deere. So I'm still watching the clock here. John Deere hired us in about 2015 to help create all of their assembly line training. In other words, what we call line design training, and their material flow or material delivery, material management training for John Deere worldwide. Because what they saw happening was lack of sustainability within John Deere for the approach they wanted all their factories, and they have over 50 of them, to follow. Now, the factories were given a lot of freedom, but they wanted a certain level of consistency that they weren't able to sustain, because on their own, people were doing all kinds of things, different things. So they saw, the company going in different directions regarding their lean initiative, the way they wanted the factories to run within a lot of flexibility. So we developed for them two things. One was our John Deere specific, customized John Deere training class in line design and materials, which would be delivered live. So thank you, John Deere. Under the John Deere umbrella, I got to go to China, to Brazil, to Germany, to, all over the place. Canada, Mexico, a lot of time in Monterrey, for example. Monterrey has John Deere has a factory, or multiple factories, in Monterrey and Saltillo. So, thank you, John Deere, for those experiences. But also we did online versions of these classes. So that if you had a new hire, for example, they weren't going to be able to go to a live class, at least anytime soon, but they could take the online version, which was basically the same. So that was a great experience. As a result, then, John Deere has been able to actually sustain their continued presence. And I haven't looked at their metrics lately, but at least for, as of a few years ago, they were continuing to gain market share in just about every one of their worldwide markets, continuing to grow, continuing to improve, which is great. I wouldn't say that John Deere is at the level of Toyota in terms of their, lean maturity, but pretty darn good. And again, showing continuous improvement in all of their markets. So what we're suggesting here is that we need to have some training for everyone related to sustainability, so people understand, at least at some level, what it's all about and why it's good for the company and for them, and maybe some incentive built into that to continue to learn. And probably live training is better than online training, but if you only have online, then work with that, maybe as a group. Right. I think maybe this is the last issue. I know we're, as usual, right? I try to stay within an hour, and I think I can do it, but as usual, I'm running tight again. So issue number 6 is technology, again, with sustaining changes. Now, here's a quote from my former boss, John Costanza. What John Costanza said, and he had ulterior motives for saying this, he said, a process will always revert back to its prior level of formalization. Now, his ulterior motive was he was trying to sell software. John Costanza had this vision of a lean SAP. It was I wouldn't say lean, a DFT-based SAP type system, an ERP system, right, based on demand flow technology principles. Thinking, as he says in this comment, if you're using it, then you don't have any choice. You've got to design your assembly lines and design your Kanban systems and everything, because the system requires you to do it that way, right? You don't have a choice. So examples of that are various computerized systems that we do use. There are maintenance systems you may have in your company, MES systems, ERP systems. So we're using these already to a certain extent. And when you're using them, you have to kind of do it the way the software was designed, right? So regardless of what you'd like to do differently, you kind of are stuck. You're a prisoner of the system. And this is a cautionary tale, because what happened was this. John Costanza had the software, trying to sell the software, and requiring, pretty much strong-arming our customers to use it, and completely strong-arming the consultants, me, to use it as part of our implementation project. But the issue was this. It didn't work very well. It was slow. It was called flow power, but we called it slow power. So we were less than thrilled at having to use something that we could do maybe 100 times faster, I'm not exaggerating, in Excel than using the system. And the customers, of course, were having the same experience. So the lesson here from that, and it really was damaging to the company, damaging to JCIT, the company I was working for, to be pursuing this. Because, as consultants, we were very disenchanted with this, and people started leaving, and pretty much it led to the downfall of JCIT in a lot of ways. So the lesson here is that if you want to automate something to enforce sustainability, require people to do it the new way, that's not a bad idea, as long as what you're offering someone is easier and better than what they're doing before. If it's worse, then you're going to get pushback, right? It's not going to be a positive. Now, simply relying on self-discipline or goodwill is not an answer either. So the intermediate answer is auditing and the lean management system that we talked about earlier. But if you really want to lock in a change and people are required to use an automated system that does it that way, that pretty much guarantees that that's what's going to happen. But you have to be really careful because people are not going to like it if it's confusing, slower, more difficult, etc. So a big warning there on using technology. Okay, so we're reaching the end. I could have kept going, but I realized, boy, I'm already probably going to fill up the hour. So here's some other areas that we need to look at for sustainability. And I want you to, in the chat, maybe offer some other things that I didn't cover. I'm not suggesting I covered every single item, but we have the idea of visual management. So, you have visual displays like the tactile boards and on boards, out on the factory floor, so you can make sure that you're staying on the goal for the day. So, or other kinds of management tools like the Kamishibai boards that I mentioned earlier. We have long-term planning. That is really important. Hoshin Kanri as a way of taking your top-level vision, assuming it's correct, and then deploying it through the organization to sustain an enterprise lean initiative. I don't know how else you would do it if you don't have some kind of Hoshin type approach to planning and setting goals throughout the whole organization. Kaizen is a sustainability strategy. What we mean by that, and Toyota takes this same approach, is that once you've made an improvement to a process, it's going to backslide unless you keep your attention on it. And the way you keep your focus on a process is you make continual small improvements. That's assuming you're at level 3 or higher in the process maturity model. But they have an image at Toyota of Kaizen as kind of a block. You're pushing a car up the hill, and if you just let go, the car's going to roll back down. So you have a little block under the tire. Those are Kaizen efforts, right, in that process to keep it from backsliding.